Morning. I had a rough night last night because I was trying to make sense of the world in which we live in the context of the parable of the talents. It always seemed kind of unfair to me that the poor brother that got, and he was a brother, we know. We just believed that the one who got the one talent had to be black. And yet he buried his talent. And the others went on and multiplied theirs. And it just seems rather unfair. Why could even God do that? And then we look at the Day of Independence for this country and the resounding speeches of people like Frederick Douglass are very quick to point out all of the shortcomings and all of the inadequacies that have been a part of those of us who have come here as slaves. And yet, that does not seem to be the message that I get from this. For you see, long before there was talk of sharing talents, there was the message of Jesus that the kingdom of God is within you. That in a sense, while these three men might have been given separate talents, they were all children of the kingdom. They were all sons and daughters of God. They were all gifted with the presence and power of God within them. I remember one time we had some of my rich friends over for dinner, and they spent around all night arguing about who started out the poorest. And they were all multimillionaires. And none of them started out with anything. And the way they decided to decide who was the poorest was who was the last one to get an indoor toilet. Well, I sat there embarrassed because all of these billionaires were arguing about when they first got their indoor toilet. And I was born with mine. And it seemed as though there was something, and actually the 3 or 4 were white, 2 were black. And it turned out that, Herman Russell started out as a little boy trying to get a shoe shine stand in the city of Atlanta. And when he went down to get a permit, they laughed at him because he had a speech impediment. And he vowed in that laughter that he would never again submit himself to that kind of humiliation. And he went back and he put up his own shoe shine stand and Coca-Cola stand and said, they're not going to come down my street anyway. But he made enough money to buy a house. And he renovated the house himself at 16 and rented the house, and that's what helped him pay his way to Tuskegee. John Portman's got 19 buildings down here in downtown that he had a hard time building because they would not even let him into Georgia Tech High School because he was a poor white boy from the wrong side of town. The only way he got in Georgia Tech was to join the Navy and pass the naval examination and qualify for the Naval Academy, and then they accepted him at Georgia Tech. I'm saying that none of the people that we look to as having it made came up without struggle. And that this thing that I'm talking about in this parable is the choice that we must make. And if I could have thought of this last night or yesterday, I would have called it in as the title. But I can never think of titles when I'm trying to figure out what to say. But by and large, what we're trying to do is victims or victors. And the choice is ours. Now, the reason I've been thinking about this is I've been talking to so many young people here lately who are discouraged, who are despairing, who are talking about not wanting to be a part of this country, the hypocrisy of this government. It doesn't make any difference. And I finally quit arguing with them and said, okay, where you gonna go? And they start naming places. I said, I've been there. It's a great place for 2 or 3 days. But I'd hate to try to start a business there. I'd hate to run into a policeman there. I'd hate to have trouble in the courts there. I'd hate to be born in the wrong tribe there. That anywhere you go in the world, there is difficulty. And you can decide that you are going to be a victim. And it doesn't matter how privileged you are. If you have this victim mentality, it will keep you depressed, feeling sorry for yourself, and you will bury your talents, and when Lord comes back to get them, he's going to take them from you and say, you should have known better. Because you are God's child. Victimhood is not an option if you know the living God. I was with Martin Luther King when he went to see Lyndon Johnson after the Nobel Prize speech. And we were talking about Selma. And we were supposed to see President Johnson at 4 o'clock. We didn't get to see him until 7. And we didn't know what was wrong, but something was going on there. And we kind of thought Hoover didn't want us to meet anyway, so he might be trying to block us. And we didn't figure it out. But when we got to see the president, he was very depressed and despondent. And here was a man who had just passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And all he could say was, I know we need voting rights, but I just don't have the power. I can't go back to Congress. We passed this on yesterday, the 2nd of July, 1964. And this was the 17th of December in the same year. And he said, it's just impossible to go back to Congress with 2 civil rights bills in succession. We have other things that we have to deal with. I just don't have the power. What we didn't know was that he had spent the 4 hours that we were kept waiting, meeting with McNamara and Richard Russell about sending troops into Vietnam. So really, and interestingly enough, Richard Russell was against voting rights acts, but he didn't want the troops to go to Vietnam either. But the president was so befuddled that he wasn't the same confident Lyndon Johnson that I'd seen on other occasions. He kept saying, I'm sorry, I'm with you. We'll get around to this, but right now I just don't have the power. So we walked out of the West Wing and that long, dark hallway down there. They didn't have bars and trees and guards, everything. We just walked out there alone. And I said to Martin, well, what do you think? I said, I guess we'll have to wait another year or so. He said, no, we just got to find a way to get the president some power. I said, now you Morehouse men or something, but here you are, 5'7", 165 pounds, and ain't got a penny in your pocket, and you gonna get the president some power. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. He said, no. And then I realized he was serious. We got to get the president some power. What I didn't realize is that I was thinking on an earthly plane. And I was thinking of all of the political realities. And with all of the trouble that we had with Lyndon Johnson, I'm still thankful that I got my Medicaid card. And I'm still thankful for Head Start. And I'm still thankful for all of the things, the civil rights bills we got. He was our friend. But he was feeling like a victim at that moment. And Martin Luther King was the victor, saying we've got to find a way to get this president some power. Well, I wasn't used to living on that spiritual plane then. I'm getting there though. But when we got back, 2 days later, who should drive over from Selma but Amelia Boynton? And Amelia Boynton said that Jim Clark has not been treating us right, and she went down the whole long list of abuses that came from Jim Clark. He decided there wouldn't be any politics in churches, and he wouldn't even let her husband be buried in his own church because her husband had been too politically active. And Jim Clark declared there was going to be no political power evolving from minority churches in Selma. And when we heard that, Martin said, isn't the NAACP Freedom Emancipation Day proclamation coming up soon? She says, yes. But he says, we can't have that. And he says, well, it happens to fall on the 1st of January. And I can't be away from my church on the first Sunday of the year. But if you can have it Monday night, we'll be there. And we will have a service, and he can call it religious, he can call it political, he can call it protest, or he can call it celebration. It matters not. But we will recognize the Emancipation Proclamation on January 2nd, 1965. Now, I knew Selma, and I was not afraid of Selma. That was where our first church was. And so I had no anxiety about it. But little did I realize that going to Selma on the 2nd of January and letting the incidents, which were not trifling, Jimmy Lee Jackson was killed, James Reeb was killed, Viola Liuzzo was killed. Before that, Schwerner, Goodman, and Cheney had been killed in Mississippi. But by the 28th, I think, of March, Lyndon Johnson, who had no power, on the 17th of December, 1964, stood up before a joint session of Congress and issued a Voting Rights Act and ended his speech with the fact that as a school teacher in Texas, he had fed many hungry children and had seen many children coming to school hungry that he could not feed. And he felt that if he ever had a chance to do something about that, he would. He said, "Little did I think I would stand where I am today. But now I have the power to do something about hungry children. I have the power to do something about voting rights, and I intend to use it, and we shall overcome." We had gone from victimhood to victory in about 3 months. But nobody really could plan that. Nobody could organize that. Nobody could figure out how to get it done. But there was a spirit that we could follow. And in following the spirit, the old Methodist hymn says, "Lead kindly light, amid the encircling gloom, lead thou me on. The path is dark, and I am far from home. Lead thou me on. Guide thou my feet. I do not ask to see the distant scene. One step, enough for me." And so we took that one step toward Selma, and that one step led toward another, and before you know it, C.T. Vivian was being beaten up in front of the courthouse, and it was all over the world. And then we went across the bridge on what came to be known as Bloody Sunday, and the whole world awakened to the problems of Selma. And with no money, no guns, no political power to speak of, but with moral authority and the spiritual force of being children of God, we were able to right this nation and turn it from wrong to right. And I think that's the message of the talents. Yes, we all have different talents, but we are all God's children. And as we begin to realize that we don't have to be victims, because the power of God is within us, and that power can change heaven and earth, and we can overcome any obstacle or difficulty that has been put in our past. He didn't say it would be easy, but I don't believe he brought us this far to leave us. And so as we open the doors of the church, we say very simply, yes, this is a difficult country to live in, but it's probably the best that I've ever been in, and I've been to 152. But there's a thing that you got to realize. It guarantees life, liberty, and not happiness, the pursuit of happiness. And if you're going to bury your talents and not pursue happiness, you're going to be sad all your days. But if you live by faith, if you use and exercise the Spirit of God, the power of God that is within each and every one of us, there is nothing that we can't overcome. And that is the message of the morning, that God's Spirit descend upon our hearts and wean us from earth and all its pulses move. Stoop to our weakness, mighty as thou art, and let us love thee as we ought to love. May we invite you to join this congregation, but maybe we're not even wanting you to join the church. We just want you to come up and say that today I decided I am no longer a victim. I am a victor in Christ Jesus.